So the timing is perfect. We're honored and thrilled to have Kay Firth-Butterfield, as mentioned, one of the foremost experts in the world of governance of AI, as our guest today. She is a barrister, professor, technologist, entrepreneur, and former judge, and has a quite impressive bio. She co-founded AI Global and was one of the world's first chief AI ethic officers way back in 2014. And a cool fact, created the AI ethics Twitter hashtag. And Kay is the vice chair of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in AI and Autonomous Systems. And Kay has advanced degrees in law and international relationships and regularly speaks on the many benefits as well as the challenges that arise from the use of AI, and has been consistently recognized as a leading woman in AI since 2018. Kay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to
Kay,
be here.
Wonderful to have you, and thanks for agreeing to be on the show, and of course to be one of our keynotes, virtual keynotes actually, or in person, sorry, coming up at ODSC West. So, Kay, tell us about your background and your role as, sounds like a very cool job title, Head of AI and Machine Learning at the World Economic Forum, no less.
Sure. So as you said, I started as a barrister, which is, for those people who don't know, in England, we wear wigs and gowns, and it's essentially a trial lawyer. So I started in my life doing that. And still, I'm quite obsessed by the need to help people who can't help themselves. And so I didn't earn a lot of money as being a lawyer, but I got a lot of satisfaction out of doing human rights law, essentially, and some business law as well to pay the bills, because human rights law doesn't pay. And so, people often ask me, well, what's the thread between being a barrister, doing that, and what you do now? And the thread that runs through it is that need to help, wanting to make sure that people's lives are better than when I came into them, either as a lawyer or what I do now. And so, having been a lawyer for a while, the next step up is being a judge. And fortunately in the UK, they appoint you to sit part-time. And so I actually didn't enjoy being a judge. We could go into why, but we haven't got enough time to go into why. Maybe I'm just not sufficiently judgmental. But at that point, I'm at the top of my career. And what do I do next? So I was really fortunate to be able to come and teach in Austin, Texas at university. And so I had a while being a professor, and I got more and more interested in this intersection between artificial intelligence and effectively our future, and law and geopolitics. And so, fortunately, I was doing this in 2010 before most people. And then we had in AI governance this seminal moment in 2014 when DeepMind sold itself to Google and said, we need an ethics advisory panel as part of the deal, as part of the sales deal. And that suddenly put the things that a few of us were thinking about on the map much more. And then that was February. The 1st of May of the same year, Stephen Hawking, Stuart Russell, and Max Tegmark wrote an op-ed in the Times of London, which said essentially that AI could be the best thing we ever do or the last thing that we do as humans. And so the coupling of those two things started people actually talking, engaging in the conversation that we're having now. And by happenstance, I was on a plane from London to Austin. It's a 10-hour flight. And one of those absolutely bizarre serendipitous things, I sat next to somebody who was the CEO and chair of an AI company, a startup. And he had been reading the article in the Times because this was the same week as it came out. And by the time I got off the plane, he had offered me a job as the chief AI ethics officer. We didn't call it that at the time, but we knew that that's what I was going to go and do for his company. And there were lots of things that we had to discuss afterwards because, as you probably know, the DeepMind board at that stage wasn't named and nobody knew very much about what it did. And I was determined that if I was going to take this role, I was going to be given an opportunity to talk about what we do. And because I think it's terribly important that we don't sort of bury our AI ethics people or now governance people in the broom cupboard, but we allow them to talk about what we do externally and obviously interfacing with everybody who needs to talk to them, which I would say everyone from C-suite down in the company itself. So that's the journey. So I then moved from there, co-founded AI Global, as you say, which is now the Responsible AI Institute. And we could talk about that later in terms of certification. And then moved to the forum in 2017. So we can come to what do I do at the forum? Obviously, most people know the forum because of Davos, where we convene the world's leaders, be they business or state leaders, civil society leaders, academics, for a few days and discuss the world's problems. But the rest of the year, there are many of us doing work in different areas. So although I do AI, for example, some of my colleagues think about mobility or advanced manufacturing or blockchain. I could go on. And we were set up to think about the governance of artificial intelligence, in my case, and do work with governments, business, civil society, and academia, which moved the needle forward in the area of AI governance. What we do now is slightly different. So I would say we have the soil of responsible AI, because I don't think that you should ever consider creating any AI tools without thinking about embedding it in that responsible AI soil. And then we look at applications of artificial intelligence, and we also have a big piece of work around the use of AI in climate adaptation. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
That sounds like such an exciting role at the World Economic Forum, and Kay, I love your the journey. What a fascinating journey, and then also what a great story. It's just great life lessons there that you combine passions, law and AI. And I see a lot of people transitioning into AI. They got another passion, another career, and sometimes you don't have to drop something to get into something else. That's kind of like something I followed myself. And yeah, as my mother used to say to me, if you put yourself in traffic, you know, the AI traffic, or whatever it is you choose to do, great things will happen. So what a wonderful story. So let's get into AI governance. So you mentioned responsible AI. You just mentioned AI governance. Made some great points already, but there are various interpretations of AI governance. What would your definition of AI governance be?
Yes. So I would, when I think about AI governance, I sort of think it is the same thing for me as responsible AI. So what we're thinking about doing is making sure that the design, development, and use of artificial intelligence tools are done in the best possible way so that they have the best possible outcomes and the least possible negative outcomes. And what we have found since I started doing this all those years ago is that there are some applications that can have very negative outcomes. And so then we think about governance. So there's the responsible AI, or the AI governance that goes on within the companies, or should go on within the companies that are creating the products. And then on the other side, there's what can government do, or what should government do? So government has, to my mind, two methods of governance. The first is what I call soft governance mechanisms. And I could give you an example of that if it's interesting. And then obviously there's the hard governance, which is the regulations. So passing laws and enforcing laws. And so I suppose, two examples of what I mean by soft governance. You mentioned when we came in, the US AI Bill of Rights. That's an example of soft governance because it has no teeth. So there's no enforcement procedure to it, but it's the US government sort of setting out its stage and saying, citizens, businesses, the world, this is how we think about responsible AI. Another possibility is something that we did when I first moved to the forum. We collaborated with the UK government to work on procurement of artificial intelligence. So, as you know, a lot of money is flowing through governments to procure artificial intelligence. So if you're a company, you will have to elevate your responsible AI to the point of being able to sell to government. So if governments set responsible AI targets through the procurement process, then actually the government's doing two things. One, it's elevating anybody who might sell to them, but also it's saying to the general population and actors within their state, this is our tolerance level. And if we were to go on and regulate, this is where it would be. And that's actually been really successful. It's now not just in the UK, it's in many countries around the world who've all taken what we started with the UK and adjusted it for their own purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Credit to the UK. I know they've been at the forefront of AI governance with some seminal papers and other parliamentary inquiries and whatnot. And that's very interesting because that was another question I had top of mind, like who is responsible for AI governance? So that's very insightful. You have hard governance, you have soft governance at the state, country level, and then you have the organizational level, which is top-down strategic directives. So now that we have an idea as who's responsible for AI governance, interesting to know what you've found within organizations and companies themselves, how they, who to make responsible for that. But a key question to me is like, how widely adopted is it? So within companies. So obviously, we'll talk a little bit more later about how countries are doing hard and soft enforcement. But what's your experience to date with companies adopting this, whether it's at the US level, the UK level, or worldwide?
Yeah, so it's much better. It's getting better every year. There are more tools available for companies to use. So, when back in 2014, we had to make it up ourselves, but you're not at that point anymore. So there are lots of tools that are available, and lots of courses now that are available. And so, as you probably know, I do a podcast called In AI We Trust ? And we invite people who are really at the cutting edge of doing responsible AI in their company to come onto that show and explain how they do it, what their thought processes are. So, if you want to think about how do you instill responsible AI into your company, then there's a treasure trove of examples just in that one podcast. And then there's, as I say, there are courses held by lots of different organizations now. And also we, at the forum have been doing some work on collecting best practices. So far we have collected best practices from Microsoft, IBM, and Salesforce. And we are now about to start with 2 more major companies who have already thought about how to do responsible AI and are prepared to share their version of that. We're not saying that this one's better than that one. We're just saying, here are some things that might help you to work out what you should be doing in responsible AI within your company. So I would say that a lot of big companies that might call themselves AI companies are definitely on the right route. Startups are of considerable concern to us because there is not enough VC money demanding responsible AI of their startups. So that's an area of concern. Another area of concern is really the companies that don't yet believe themselves to be AI companies because they still call themselves a healthcare company, for example. And yet they're using AI in their back office, and they're probably using AI in the development of some of the work, the drugs, for example. So, it's really helping those traditional companies to see that they are AI companies, and they probably need some responsible AI within the company.
No, incredibly insightful. Again, because it's interesting that the cost of, let's call it irresponsible AI, is rising rapidly. And at some point, industry will pay more attention to that, but at what point and at what cost, obviously. But we will get to that. But another excellent point you made about, your podcast, by the way, if we could share that link. Number one, yeah, excellent resource. And then lots of courses out there. But you're teaching, as you mentioned at the introduction, currently down in Texas. And I just recall back to my undergrad degree, my graduate degrees. I was doing engineering or computer science, and none of this was on the radar. Now, granted, this was in the early 90s and late 90s, so I'm dating myself a bit here. But it was there was no responsible technology even back then. But do you think that universities especially are doing enough to make responsible AI a core part of the curriculum, not an elective or not a bolt-on later?
In one word, no. But some of them do it exceedingly well. So CMU, they have a course where they actually bring their humanities students and their AI students together and make them do a whole semester of working together to think through these problems, because one of the things that we do recommend all the time is that, to make sure that you don't have bias in your products, you really need to bring a team around the people who are creating the product. So if you're in your 20s and you're a guy, you may not understand all the nuances of creating a product. For me, who's a woman in her, we won't mention how old. What are you need to be bringing some of those humanities folk into the room to have that initial discussion, which is why I talk about you need to think about responsible AI and design, development, and post-sale. And we'll come to the legal ramifications possibly of that. Yes, it's really important to make this part of every engineer's education. Some, as I say, some do it really well. Others don't do it at all. And, when I think about this, I gave the example of CMU, but we work on a global stage. We have offices thinking about this in 16 different countries. And so I think it's really important that we think about the world in totality when we talk about responsible AI or AI governance.
Yeah, very good point. And so we're talking about AI governance, and we're bringing up responsible AI. And at ODSC, we've whole tracks around responsible AI, machine learning, safety, and sometimes at the conference level, at the business level, AI governance can be talked about almost in the abstract. But for a lot of the people here listening to this show now and in the future, what are some of do you feel are the best practices underlying good governance? So, because it's a really interesting point you brought up about startups being underfunded, or they're even, regardless of the amount of money, they're always underfunded in certain areas. And I would agree that responsible AI and governance is one. And then even other companies. But let's say I'm a practitioner, I'm going into a corporation, they want me to be a data science and machine learning engineer. What should I be on the lookout in terms of AI governance? Obviously, a big red flag is there is no AI governance. but what should they expect in terms of best practices that underpin good governance?
Yeah, sure.
Interviewing for a job. And then my question is, well, what are you doing in terms of AI governance? Because as a practitioner, I'm putting myself at risk as well, right? So sorry, Kay, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, you are. And also, do you want to work for somebody who doesn't care? I guess that's a big question you need to ask yourself before you go into that interview, because that will help you frame some of those questions. And so obviously, what do you have a responsible AI practice? What does it look like? At what stage are questions going through that responsible AI practice? So different companies do it in different ways. So, some of them have a sort of big a responsible AI company, the piece that sits in the middle. And if you have worries, you ask questions. And as they hear about things that you're doing, they ask questions of you. And many companies will have whole lists of this is what you have to do as you consider starting a project, so that you don't fall foul of our responsible AI practice. Other companies have their responsible AI work put into, for example, government affairs, or don't have it tied to the people who are actually creating the tools. That would be a red flag for me, because if you're really wanting to do this properly, you are going to want to have a conduit between you and whoever's in the responsible AI practice. Another thing that you might look at, depends upon your appetite for income, is some companies, pay bonuses based upon how fast you do the work, or, how fast the product goes out of the door. And that's a bit of a red flag for me, because if you're being bonused to produce something by X time, have you got time in that runway to actually go and talk to the responsible AI people and say, whoops, we might have a problem here. And so you need to have a company where the bonus structure and the responsible AI structure actually meet, rather than are disjointed in this way. The other things that I might say is, do read, before you go to an interview, do read our toolkits. We've done one just for C-suite, because we believe that everybody this isn't just a CTO's job. This is everybody in the C-suite will have some AI happening in their vertical. And we believe that the C-suite should understand what's going on in their company, how they're using AI. And the other thing is just go and read what, what Microsoft does, what IBM does, what Salesforce does. And that'll give you a whole bunch of questions that you can ask. You might want to ask whether you have access to philosophers or social scientists, etc., when you're in the development stage.
Great advice, Kay. Absolutely excellent advice. So as mentioned, the US government's federal government just released the AI Bill of Rights, which you interestingly termed as soft governance. And we were just looking at stats a few days ago. Over 65 countries have enacted various policies around AI since 2017. So you already kind of talked about your take on the Bill of Rights. You can expand on that, of course, and we'll talk a little bit more about the government's role in policing AI, because in my mind, it's been a pretty light, soft touch so far. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it depends where in the world you are, whether it's been a light touch or not, or whether going forward it's going to be a light touch. So, we've been working, for example, with India, and they have developed a very coherent strategy for thinking about responsible AI and introducing some laws around responsible AI. The EU is going to create the EU AI Act, and it's been in ongoing in creation for a few years now. But they're really getting to the deep pieces of putting it together now. And so if you are working for a company that works with the EU, you are going to be bound by that act. And so I do see that act as having the same impact as GDPR. So what we saw with GDPR is, rather than, one thing that we do for Europe, or one thing that we do for somewhere else, and one thing that we do for somewhere else, big companies certainly coalesced around, well, we've got to do it for Europe, so we might as well do it elsewhere. What we also saw with GDPR is that a lot of countries adopted GDPR with a twist, because it was just easier for them to do so, because the EU had done all the legwork on privacy. And so I think that that act, the AI Act, will have exactly the same trickle-down effect around the world. Where else are you seeing regulation? Well, you're seeing regulation in China as well. And the Chinese government has recently put in a whole swathe of regulations which do control how AI is being used in China. So with the US, what are we seeing in the US? We're not seeing any regulation coming out in the US. And, bits, and mainly state-based. So if you want to find out what the regulation in the US is, you really need to go and look at AI regulation states as opposed to AI regulation federal. And so how is this likely to play out without regulation? It's likely to play out through the law. And so it's hard for companies to really sort of decide what's better. Would it be better to have regulation, because then at least you know where you stand, or do you have to wait for lawyers to come in and create start suing people? And so to give you an example, or government bodies. So to give you an example, the EEOC, as you know, is bound to protect people's civil rights. Well, one of the places that we're seeing AI interfering with people's civil rights is in use in hiring and use in mortgage lending, or lending generally. And that's because of the bias that has found its way into some of those tools. And so the EEOC has said that they will be suing algorithms, so not the algorithms, the people who create them, which are in contravention of the Civil Rights Act. So there's a lot of law likely to hit this space fairly soon.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it is global. So I would encourage her, because I know we've got lots of attendees from various countries listening in. So go check out what your, like I said, 65 different countries. Go check out when you have some time. Google what's going on in your country around AI governance. Please do check out all those great resources Kay mentioned. And interesting, we got a question from one of our audience members, if we can highlight that there, around, so we already covered, when you're going to the interview stage, top-down governance, but so I get by the interview stage and I'm hearing the right things about governance, but then I get to my company, I'm like, I don't think governance is still at the right place here. Like as a practitioner, and a lot of times as practitioners, we're individual contributors. We're not managers. We're not at the C-suite level. How can we, help guide that policy for implementing governance? Yeah, company.
Certainly. So I mean, I think it's very important that particularly young people who are starting their careers go into companies that give you an opportunity to be heard. So if I was going into a company where I wasn't given an opportunity to be heard, I would be worried about going into that company. So, obviously on one hand, there's the whistleblower thing, and you don't want to be in that position unless you absolutely can't afford it. So how would you start? I would suggest that you would start by bringing other people in your group together. And then together you could raise the issue of responsible AI, or you could raise the issue of we're creating this tool, but wouldn't it be a better tool and better in the market and make us more money if it had this step in, i.e. removing bias, for example, if you're or adjusting for bias, if you're a company that's going to use AI and human resources, some of and there are tools out there to help you think through that. Again, we created one, which is best practice guidelines for the use of AI in human resources, which the EEOC has said is best in class. So that's a good one to go to. So I think it's networking, finding people who are like-minded, but really making the business case for this to your manager, because your manager and people above are not going to want something that goes out and they get sued. I mean, it's all about brand at the end of the day. Do you want to be the brand that it doesn't do responsible AI? How does that sound?
No, absolutely. And again, we cover a lot of ground in this at ODSC, our webinars, because as mentioned, like you've been at the forefront of AI governance and responsible AI. And as you mentioned earlier, the tools for doing this are really kind of coming around. So I think that's the disconnect a lot of people have when I speak to practitioners, because they look at AI governance as, well, this sounds great. It's all written down, there are guidelines. But what does that mean to me as a practitioner? So I think it comes down to practitioners, managers, team leads and stuff like that to bridge the gap between AI governance, responsible AI, and what that actually means. And, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. We're just talking to Alex Ranther last week. We had an interview with him about data-centric AI. Andrew Ning was talking about data-centric AI. And really a lot of governance and responsible AI kind of starts with the data. First, number one, that's where you identify bias. That's where you can understand data privacy issues and all that good stuff. Of course, the models themselves can have issues as well. But as you mentioned, Kay, there's lots of good tools going out. And this is not a technical discussion, so we have You have explainable AI, there's SHAP, there's Lime, and those were at the forefront of it 2 or 3 years ago, but there's lots of new tools out there. So again, I would encourage people to, if you want to figure out, understand how to implement some of what Kay is talking about, go check out AI Plus. There's lots of free videos on responsible AI tools out there, frameworks as mentioned. And what you're also seeing now is like tools like that are widely adopted, such as TensorFlow. They have responsible AI plugins available for them as well. So those are always good to look at. So again, please check those out as we kind of get through the discussion, because we want to kind of help you bridge the gap between, what is something you want to implement as policy to how you actually deal with it as a practitioner. And speaking of which,
if I can add on that, certification, there are some certification conversations going on through the Responsible AI Institute in America, and that looks as if the way that Europe will go, they will require, they'll create standards, and then through standards that will set up the implementation mechanisms for the EU Act. So standards, the IEEE, we've been working on this since 2015. So there's a lot of help for you there. And the OECD has produced a lot of tools as well for those of you who are not in America.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about the certification for a second, because one of the things we're very concerned about is AI safety, machine learning safety. And there's obviously, as I just mentioned, there's a tool part of that, there's an implementation part of it. But at the end of the day, I think you do need training on that, you do need certification. So if you can expand on that a little more, would love to hear about that.
Certainly. So we're looking at the field sort of developing. So you've got standards, you've got certification, you've got and we've got the law, and of course we've got the fact that if you allow things not be safe, you've got, as I say, the law. Somebody's going to come along and sue your business. And so that's sort of the ultimate litmus test for, okay, so, you've got to get this right. You don't want your autonomous vehicle regularly running someone over, for example. Singapore is extremely advanced in certification. They're back in 2017, they started to look at how certification could be imposed on companies working in Singapore. And so they created guidelines for certification. And now they have just in April moved to having whole courses around certification, in regard to responsible AI governance, safety, etc. So that's the gold standard as far as I'm concerned, and it's really the leading piece of work in the world on this.
Oh, excellent! Definitely be checking that out. And Kay, we're coming towards the end of our interview here, so I got a few more wrap-up questions. But briefly, what do you think the future of AI governance looks like from where you are?
Well, I think that the EU Act will frankly put it on everybody's radar. Make sure you're ready, and you and your company are ready for the EU Act. It's interesting that many CEOs that I talk to still are not aware of its existence.
Yeah, again, great advice. I remember when GDPR came out, working both in the UK and Europe and the US, a lot of US companies are thinking, and companies outside of the UK or Europe thought that it wasn't going to be an issue for them, and it was quite quickly. So I think hopefully we've learned our lessons on that. And then, of course, I would like to remind our audience that if you haven't already gotten a pass for ODSC West, you can come to ODSC West. All the keynotes are free. And Kay, you will be speaking at ODSC West. You're just going to give us a a little hint on your topic, which I can guess at for ODSC West?
Well, I like talking about responsible AI because it's so important, but equally I'm not going to be repeating what you've heard. So please do come to the talk, because I'm going to talk about responsible AI, but more in terms of applications and also about our working climate, which I hope that you'll find very interesting. And we all want to help with this terrible climate crisis we have.
Absolutely. And Kay, you've been an awesome guest. Wonderful background, and thank you for sharing so many insights. And I think it would behove a lot of us to, we already do follow your work, but for the rest of our audience, you mentioned the podcast, which is excellent. Where else can they follow your work and your group's work at the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to, you can just Google World Economic Forum AI, and most of our work will come up through that. And all of our papers, so we never write white papers because they tend to sit on people's shelves and gather dust. What we do is we always create toolkits. So the how to do. So you'll find lots of how to do X well through doing that. Also, if you don't already follow it, the World Economic Forum has a running blog called Agenda. And so lots of our pieces, there's lots about AI on Agenda. And again, you can Google that. And today there is a piece written by myself and one of our global innovators, Can Tell Us, on the US AI Bill of Rights. So very, very pertinent today.
Excellent timing. Okay, again, I must say you've been a wonderful, wonderful guest. Such a pleasure to have you on the show, and looking forward to meeting you in person in a few short weeks.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be able to talk about this passion of mine.
Excellent. Thank you, Kay. So you're going to go backstage, and I'm going to stay on for a few minutes to answer any career, ODSC, or AI Plus questions. But bye for now, Kay. Thank you.
Bye.